Hello, everyone, and welcome to Jane Austen and Company. My name is Anne Ferdig, and I'm a doctoral candidate in English and Comparative Literature at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, as well as the co-founder and co-director of Jane Austen and Company. Jane Austen and Company is a free public humanities series hosted by the Jane Austen Summer Program, or as we like to call it, JASP. I'm so happy to welcome you all to the sixth program in our 2021 series, Race and the Regency. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Damianne Scott, who will be giving the talk, Bridgerton's Queen Charlotte is Playing to the Masses, and It's About Time. But before we begin, I'd like to hand things over to my co-director and colleague, Dr. Danielle Christmas, to speak some more about what this series means this year. Danielle?
Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Christmas, and I'm an assistant professor of English and comparative literature at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I research and teach about the relationship between cultural production, like Jane Austen's novels, and their socioeconomic context, including the economic politics of slavery. It is this work that has allowed me to co-host this series, Race and the Regency, which will be running through May 2021. The speakers in this series will explore the role of race, nationalism, imperialism, and identity in the works and times of Jane Austen, as well as in literary and film adaptations of the time period. Perhaps you attended my talk on the Zong crisis in Mansfield Park this past February, or joined us for another lecture by any number of the featured speakers we've had the honor of hosting since then. If so, and you are back in anticipation of this entirely different and yet wholly connected scholarly presentation on what I suspect is our collective Netflix obsession, then you already understand the ethos of this series: to gather a diverse cross-section of intellectual and professional points of view and grow together in conceptualizing what race means for understanding the Regency and what Jane Austen's Regency means for our own complicated notions of race. I know that I speak for all of us when I say how, based on your presence and enthusiastic curiosity thus far, we are thrilled by the prospects of what a series like Race and the Regency has already achieved and can achieve moving forward. So thank you for joining us, and welcome back for this sixth event in Race and the Regency featuring Damianne Scott.
Hi, I'm Susan Allen Ford. I'm a professor of English Emerita at Delta State University in Mississippi and editor of the journals Persuasions and Persuasions Online. And I should mention that Danielle Christmas and I are editing a special issue of Persuasions Online on Jane Austen and issues of diversity that will appear this summer. I've been an enthusiastic participant in the Jane Austen Summer Program since its inception, and I'm currently serving on its board. I've also been a presenter in Jane Austen and Company's Staying at Home with Jane Austen series last year. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Damianne Scott. Damianne Candace Scott, or Damie, as she's asked us to call her, graduated from Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio, with a BA and an MA in English. More important, when her beloved high school English teacher declared that Jane Austen was too sappy for a person who loved reading Thomas Hardy, Damie's fascination with and defense of Jane Austen began. After many years of having to defend her love of Jane and other Regency and Victorian classic authors, Damie decided to create a Facebook page dedicated to her beloved Jane and to the idea that it was perfectly okay, perfectly wonderful, in fact, to be an African-American woman who loves Austen novels. Her Jane Austen page, Black Girl Loves Jane, or BGLJ, therefore was born in 2018. Since then, Damie has become a member of the Jane Austen Society of North America. She's gained over 600 followers through her BGLJ page and has been a guest speaker for the Jane Austen Society of India and has participated as a panelist for the virtual Teal House Regency retreat this past January. Her love for Jane Austen and her outreach have evolved into a pure mission of celebrating and encouraging diversity in Austen and other classic literature in many variations, including Damie's first novel, Persuaded, which aims to be published at in late 2021. She teaches courses in composition, literature, and the first year experience at Cincinnati State University and the University of Cincinnati Blue Ash. You can check out her page, Black Girl Loves Jane, on Facebook.
And Danielle has dropped that link in the chat if you want to check out her Facebook page. I would also now like to introduce Emily Spare, Technical Director for Jane Austen and Company, as well as the Registrar for the Jane Austen Summer Program, who is helping us with tonight's program. Emily will be moderating the audience chat today and is going to explain how the Q&A process will work.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. The event will take about 90 minutes in total. Throughout and after Damie's presentation, you are welcome to put questions in the Q&A box. Susan, Ann, and Danielle will then ask these questions to Damie. If you'd like to chat with the other attendees, please use the chat box, which some of you have already found. Don't put any questions for Damie in the chat, or Ann, Susan, and Danielle will likely not see them. If you have any technical issues, please feel free to reach out to the panelists in the chat box. But if you want your chat to go to everyone, please use the, I'm sorry, I just got distracted by the chat. That's my problem. So if you want your chat to go to everyone, make sure that it says to panelists and attendees. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Please note that tonight's program will be recorded. We will notify you all via our Facebook page and website when it is available to view. And without any further ado, I'd like to hand things over to Damie.
Okay, hello everyone. I am so pleased to be before you tonight, and I am so grateful to Jane Austen and Company for the opportunity to talk to you about the newest pop culture sensation in Regency period, which is Bridgerton. And so I am so happy again to be able to talk to you, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say about what I'm going to discuss tonight. So let me just bring up my PowerPoint for you and we can begin. So as it's already been noted, I'm going to talk to you tonight about Bridgerton's Queen Charlotte and why she is assumed to be playing to the masses. And if she is playing to the masses, it is about time. So what sparked this discussion for me is during the hoopla of the run up to Bridgerton, there were some postings on Facebook, and one of the postings was this article about whether or not Queen Charlotte was the first Black queen. Now, I didn't pay attention at the time to the date of the article, which was 2009, but I thought it was a very interesting article because one of the experts that was asked about Queen Charlotte's heritage talked about how an interesting concept or idea it would be that all the royal crowns of Europe, including Prince Harry, could possibly then be Black. And I was like, okay, that is an interesting idea. But also what even furthered me into this discussion was this idea that one of the commentators or one of the posters on Facebook said that what was occurring, this time where more and more movies and films and television shows were including diversity and inclusivity, was that they were playing to the masses, that they were pandering to these audiences. And I took offense to that idea that they were playing to the audiences or pandering to them. And so I responded back on Facebook, and now you're getting to see the visual discussion that I wanted to have with the gentleman who wanted to say that we were playing to the masses. So just a quick brief history of Queen Charlotte. We know she was a German princess. We know she married King George. We know she had certain interests, including finding possibly Mozart. She was the mother of 15 children, including the Prince Edward, who's going to be Queen Victoria's father. And this will lead to, of course, again, Prince Harry. And I mentioned Prince Harry because, of course, Prince Harry marries Meghan Markle. And me personally, did not know who Queen Charlotte was until the hullabaloo about Meghan Markle began, because it was like, oh, we're going to have a Black princess finally, which is my expression of it. But people were telling me, oh, there was one before her, and her name was Charlotte, and that she was the first Black Queen of England. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the speculative history of Queen Charlotte and how it plays into the Bridgerton story, and what we know to be somewhat true and somewhat factual and some speculative, or maybe myth or theory, I should say. Disclaimer, I have not read the Bridgerton novels by Julia Quinn because, one, the novels are not exactly like the Netflix series. There is no inclusiveness in the novels. They are all appearing of non-people of color. And the second disclaimer is Queen Charlotte is not in the text. Queen Charlotte's character for the Netflix show is simply created by Shonda Rhimes and by Chris Van Dusen. Not that Queen Charlotte didn't exist during this period of time, because we know she did, but for the text's purpose of all the Bridgerton series, she's not there. So Shonda Rhimes and her co-creator decided that they needed someone of power and someone who was a person of color to kind of oversee all the happenings, particularly since the Bridgerton family were very high class in this Regency era. So they decided that they were going to have Queen Charlotte involved. And they decided, of course, that Queen Charlotte would be a person of color. Again, this is very important because in the first episode, I believe, they say that her eyes are the only eyes that matter. And the eyes we're talking about here is Queen Charlotte. Queen Charlotte is the one that kind of gets the ball rolling, because she is the one that determines that Daphne, for those of you who have seen the show, and hopefully you have because it is good, she's the one that determines that Daphne is the diamond of the water. And it's because of Queen Charlotte that sets the role for the rest of the story throughout the rest of the season. She also allows, by her presence and by her marriage to King George, the ending of the separations of the races between people of color and non-people of color. Her marriage to King George III in the series also allows marriages between the races, and it also allows titles to be bestowed on people of color. So this is why we have the first Duke of Duke of Hastings, and then we have Simon, of course, who will become the future Duke of Hastings. So it's very important what Bridgerton's Queen Charlotte does for the inclusiveness of the entire show. And Lady Danbury makes it very clear in the show that it is love that brings them together. It's love that brings these races together. And therefore Simon Basset, who is the Duke of Hastings, should embrace that. Now, some people will have criticized that this is a very weak understanding or explanation for why there are the mixing of races in the Regency period. However, I'm hopeful that as the series goes on, we will get more and more explanation exactly about what happened. So Shonda Rhimes and her showrunner, deciding that Queen Charlotte should be a person of color, based their theory off of the idea that was researched and developed and presented by a man named Mario de Valdez y Concon. And he, through his research as a genealogist, said that Charlotte was a descendant of a 15th century Portuguese noblewoman, and then traced that noblewoman to a 13th century Portuguese ruler by the name of Alfonso III, and his lover, who was a Black Moor. Now, this is how de Valdez describes her. Some take issue with the title of Black Moor. Some would say that just means that that person was a Muslim. Valdez disagrees. And he will continue on not only with that tracing of Charlotte's heritage, but he will also put some coincidences into this discussion as well. One of the things that Valdez says is that they were very particular about choosing Sir Allan Ramsay to paint Queen Charlotte's portrait. So her coronation portrait of 1762, the one we all know, the one that's been in all the articles, was painted by Sir Allan Ramsay. And it is the portrait that most people kind of glean this idea that she may have some African features. So Sir Allan Ramsay was chosen. The Valdez believes he was chosen because he was an anti-slavery intellectual, that he was married into the family that was related to Dido Bell Lindsay, who we know as Bell, who of course was the great niece of the Chief Lord Justice. And so with all those situations, as well as some other situations, minor situations, Valdez believes that was them telling of her heritage without necessarily telling of her heritage. There are those in other memoirs, including the memoir of Baron Stockmar in 1873, who says that Queen Charlotte was small and had a crooked nose, but also a true mulatto face. There's also a nobleman by the name of Horace Walpole, who also described Charlotte's nose as her nostrils being too wide or spreading too wide, and her mouth having the same fault. The Valdez also argues that as Charlotte grew older, that they did what we would term today as photoshopping of her. And so they were painting her to be thinner in the features, facial features, lighter skin. As she grew older, of course, her hair would get grayer. So either her hair was being painted more to be more gray, or she was wearing her wigs at the time. And so there was this play upon whether she was something or not. Even in caricatures that were presented of Queen Charlotte during that time, they were always paying attention to her nose, as you can see in this particular caricature with Mr. Gilray, I'm sorry, that her nose would seem to be of a more broader sense. Her lips seem to be more bigger. Her facial structure seems to be more characteristically different from those also in this caricature, which were her husband and her children. Now, not everybody is convinced of this theory regarding Queen Charlotte. There are many people out there who say that this may not be true. David Williamson, who was a co-editor of the Debret Peerage, said even if it is true, it's been so long ago, who cares? And it's been a long time. So leading even up to the birth of Charlotte would have been about 500 years. So from Alfonso III to the birth of Charlotte, 500 years would have passed with that African lineage in her. Not to say that it would have dissipated, but according to Mr. Williamson, it would have enough to not cause such a hullabaloo that people are talking about today. Lisa Hinton, who wrote in The Critic, also suggests that anyone who really ties their anchor to this idea that Queen Charlotte may be biracial or may have African heritage in her, also might have some inaccurate or unwise, or maybe are dealing with some intellectual unsavory company, because the theory of de Valdez has not really been 100% proven. There has been no DNA test taken with any of the royals. There's no DNA test to be had of Charlotte, and so we just don't know. But I'm not concerned myself with Charlotte being of African descent or of being a person of color in real life, as much as I'm concerned with people who don't embrace the possibility that she could be a person of color, and at least a person of color for Bridgerton's purpose. And why there's such an uproar with this idea of Queen Charlotte being portrayed as a person of color. So some critics of Charlotte's portrayal is, one, we have this woman of color being put as the head of all that she surveys, and yet she gets this because of her husband being sick, who is a Caucasian, and we really don't even get a discussion about it in the show. And so some people find the fact that we don't even discuss how she gets this power and what it means to be this Black woman with power during this time is a flaw for the show. Some people think that the fact that they actually bring in the realism of George III being sick in the show immediately takes it out of its fantasy world that many people have kind of said this is a hyper world, a hyper Regency time. And so therefore, with it being a hyper Regency time, for you then to bring reality into the discussion, all of a sudden changes whether or not it can be believable that Charlotte was a person of color, and was she there at all, since what we know about that period, particularly for people of color, is not necessarily a great time for them. So there are some critics of having Charlotte being portrayed as a person of color. My concern, though, is, again, as I was saying, those who are so adamant about the idea that as a television program that's never going to be 100% real or 100% pure to the time, why there's such an uproar about this idea for Bridgerton, as well as any kind of Regency period or Victorian period drama. What is the problem with colorblind casting and color conscious casting? So I wanted to give a couple theories that I thought, and from what I've seen in research, exist, and also define for those who may not know what the difference are, what they are. So colorblind casting simply is casting an actor or an actress regardless of their race, their religion, their ethnicity, their body type, their gender, their sex. It's irrelevant to the role that is being asked to be portrayed. So an example of this, our early example of this, at least in my memory, was back in 1997. The Wonderful World of Walt Disney did Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, where we have Whoopi Goldberg as the queen. Her husband is played by Victor Garbo. He is the king. We have Brandy Norwood as the princess of Cinderella. And then their son is played by a Filipino actor. So we have this multi-cast, multiracial, diverse cast where race religion, ethnicity, body shape has nothing to do with the casting or the telling of the story. It's simply telling the story, and whoever is the best actor or actress for that role was cast in that role, with the only goal of having a diverse cast. Then we have what is called color conscious casting. And color conscious casting is the intentional consideration of race or ethnicity or body shape or gender or sex to have that person that they're casting bring some honor, prestige to the role that they're being asked to portray, so that they can bring honor to that race or religion or ethnicity. And this is what Shonda Rhimes had tried to do, or is trying to do, with Bridgerton. As you can see from this picture here, we have a multi-ethnic class. We also have people who have different body shapes. So that is her goal and her hope for this particular show. And everybody in this show bring or hope to bring honor to their character by their casting. The seriousness of the color consciousness is, if you look at the family, all the Bridgertons are white. That is on purpose. All Simon Hastings, the Duke of Hastings, Lady Danbury, they are all people of color. That is on purpose, to project the role that they need to project to bring some honor to that ethnicity. Penelope, she would be considered in some circles as being not the typical body type. She was also chosen for a particular reason. So all this is going on with color conscious casting or non-traditional casting. Now, there are those purists who are going to argue that the reason why they don't appreciate the inclusiveness of Bridgerton or the inclusiveness of other films and television shows is because they are really concerned with accuracy. I do not embrace that answer, simply because history is never told by the losers. It's always told by the winners. The losers are either dead or their voices have been suppressed. And so when I hear that this portrayal of Regency period is inaccurate because of the clothing, because of the roles that are being cast, because of the music that is being played in the show, I take offense to that, because again, what is really real or really pure in 21st century productions of any television show or movie? So again, I would argue with this idea that Bridgerton and having Queen Charlotte be a person of color, or having Simon or having Lady Danbury have the power and wealth that they do, being an inaccurate portrayal of that time period because of accuracy, not, in my feeling, a legitimate claim. I do think there are 4 theories or reasons for why there is such outrage. These are just theories. There are theories that I have found other people to have. Not everyone agrees with these theories. We are open to discuss these theories with all of you. The first one is a misguided love of the British Empire. And when I say misguided love, I'm also talking about, it can be the same or parallel to the misguided love for America, that unadulterated pride in the British Empire, or into American, liberty and democracy, that we kind of put a blind eye to the other aspects of our history. one biracial journalist who focuses on the disparity between the British Empire of the imagination versus the British Empire of the reality, says that, her name is Afu Hirsch. She says that what British people do, particularly British people who love the empire, is they tend to glorify the empire, but what they're really doing is they are propagating this collective amnesia about the legacy of the colonial past. And that what has occurred is it doesn't seem to be getting any better. There are some polls that have been taken in the last year or so where UW.com did a poll in Great Britain where 32% of the people asked that they were proud of the British Empire. 37% said they were indifferent with what happened with the British Empire or what occurred in the name of the British Empire. And so with that collectiveness together, that's 60-something% of people who either love what the British Empire did and all it represents, or really is indifferent and don't care at all what the British Empire represents or what they have done in the past. And if you're indifferent to it, then that means you don't care to fix it or either understand it. And then that is concerning because then you're still in that collective amnesia. Another theory that I have found in my research is a misplaced belief in ownership. There's this misplaced belief that we who are lovers of Regency own this love of Regency. And so therefore, anyone who comes outside this Regency realm and try to infiltrate it and change it and maybe diversify it or put some inclusiveness in it, that's an issue, that's a problem. So then I found, particularly just with critics and definitely from things I've seen on Facebook, when I've posted questions on Facebook, some people are like, hey, you know, you're rewriting British history by adding inclusiveness in here. This is not accurate. Some have mentioned and said when a presentation of Dickens' Christmas Carol came on TV here in the States, that Dickens would be rolling over his grave if this was occurring. So we have this ownership issue that we won't let anybody in as purists of the Regency period. And I think that might be one of the reasons why there's outrage, particularly about Bridgerton. I haven't seen people be either totally in love with it or just totally in love with it or indifferent. Either they're totally in love with it or there's a reason why they don't like it. The third reason is this misunderstanding of Jane Austen and the Regency period and what it tends to be representative of. And when I was younger, I will admit I was partly a believer of that too, that this period of time was a time where we were gentlemen and ladies, and we were quiet, and we were delicate, and we were submissive, and gentlemen were gentlemen who would defend their ladies in honor. But what has happened, I've grown up and have read Jane Austen and studied Jane Austen and other works, is that that's not the case. Jane Austen was a feminist, and there was not this purity that has been propagated sometimes in the films about that period of time. Well, one particular person by the name of Milo Yiannopoulos, I believe I'm pronouncing his name right, he was interviewed by Nicole Wright in the Chronicles of Higher Education in 2020, 2020 or 21, I believe 20 or 21. And he uses Jane Austen as a mascot, as a person to put on a pedestal to continue to promote his very extreme idea of the alt-right, which simply is this belief that white identity, white personality, white personage is being hurt or is being trampled on. And so with that idea, he uses Jane Austen as a means of wanting society to go back to, in his words, the vision of a better bygone Britain, where it was pure and white and feminine and virginal, and where there was male dominance and where there was female submission. And so this idea of that time frame and how that time frame for them at least is representative is why some people get upset with anything that says maybe it wasn't so white, maybe it wasn't so virginal, maybe it wasn't so open to female submission, which are all aspects of Bridgerton that are challenged, or that Bridgerton challenges throughout the series. The fourth theory that I have is the theory of the miscalculated price of diversity. And this theory I have not done a whole lot of research on. I would like to. Is I was listening to the BBC Asian radio program online, their podcast. And it was right after all of the hullabaloo about Bridgerton and being the #1 show in the world, and why we as a society may or may not have a problem with brown and Black people being in Regency period dramas. And just like with everything else in the social media aspect, it was divided. Some people were like, yes, go for it. Some people were like, no, it's not accurate to the time frame. And so then the DJ posed a different question. And the question he posed was, are we upset that there are Black and brown people in Regency period pictures or films like Bridgerton? Or are we upset that there are brown and Black people in period pictures like Bridgerton because it is a success, that it is the #1 show in the world, that it is financially viable? And that made me take a step back for a moment, because I had never considered that being a possibility until he mentioned it. And the reason why it did make me take a step back and consider that it's a possibility is because Shonda Rhimes, for those of you who may not know, Shonda Rhimes is very well known for doing multicultural, multi-ethnic storylines. All of her TV shows aim for that goal. She's very into having people of color, particularly women of color, being in charge. So it's not surprising to have Queen Charlotte be a woman of color. Her shows such as Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder, also have strong Black female lead roles. She has tried, though, her hand in period pieces before as well. And that example is the picture that is on the screen before you. It's called Still Star-Crossed. And it was based off of a novel by Melissa Taub. It's a youth and young adult novel called Still Star-Crossed. And it's based on the idea of what happens after Romeo and Juliet die. So it takes place in Verona. It takes place with both competing families still reeling after the deaths of Romeo and Juliet, but she diversified the cast. So she bought the book, diversified the cast to make it more inclusive and more diverse. This aired on the network of ABC in the States in the year 2016. It was on one season. No one looked at that show, and there was really no hullabaloo or outrage that I have seen or heard about this show diversifying the cast. Now, it may be because there's no real people in this telling. Everybody is fictional in that sense, and so therefore there is no Queen Charlotte that is ruling here. However, It made no money. It was only on 1 year. If you want to see the show, you can see it on Netflix, not Netflix, YouTube for $2.99 an episode, or Prime for $2.99 an episode, but no one cared. Now we have Bridgerton. The same concept is being held, where there is a diverse cast. There is a diverse cast that have some aristocracy about them. And the only real / non-real character in the entire show is Queen Charlotte. And she is a person of color. And now there is a lot of backlash about Bridgerton, their inclusivity, their diversity, and making Queen Charlotte a person of color. And so it made me question this idea of the cost or the price of diversity, and are we willing to pay that cost? So I want to go back to the question, of Mr. Williamson about who cares. Who cares that Queen Charlotte on Bridgerton is a person of color? Well, there are a couple people that I want to just point out. First of all, the actual people who lived in the Regency period at that time actually care. By having period pieces and period films that do not denote any people of color in their presentations, ignores the fact that there were people of color in existence during that time. And as you can see on the slide, there were several famous people, well, not famous, they're famous to us now, but there were several famous people of influence that were living in London during that time of the Regency period. And so again, having this uproar about people of color being seen and talked about and their stories told during this period, and saying that it's not accurate, can be a slap in the face to people of color. The other people of color who really care are the people who are the masses of today, particularly in the United Kingdom, but also here in the United States. In the UK, 13% of the population are of some minority ethnic background, but in London proper, 40% of the population are either Black, Asian, or minority ethnic. Their television programs only represent, and I didn't put it on the slide, but you can get it from the same survey site. Their television population, those seeing themselves on the screen, those are people of color who are seeing themselves on the screen, is about 20%. And the people who are working behind the scenes, the people who are telling these stories about people of color or incorporating people of color in these television shows, are about 12%. So the people of color who are looking at these television shows want to see themselves. They want to see stories about themselves, and they want other people to hear their stories. And so again, the denial of having people have their stories being told can be somewhat of an issue, but these are the people who do care. The stars of Bridgerton themselves care, particularly Golda, who is the woman who plays Queen Charlotte. She said in a CBS interview, and that's not the quote on the screen, but she said in a CBS News interview here in the United States, how for a time in her career, she became very frustrated because she wasn't seeing herself or people of color in the roles of being a queen or a king or a duke or anything besides, particularly in this period of time, other than being a servant or being a slave. And that she found that she was having difficulty realizing her own self-worth. And that with Bridgerton, she got the opportunity to expand the story for Black people and to finally see Black people portrayed as being on top of the food chain instead of being the people who were serving the food. So all the stars here are really excited about this idea of actually representing and telling the stories about Black people, and that there is a difference between telling the stories of people of color and then just having people of color walk across the screen or in the background or walking down the street. There is a difference, and what Bridgerton has done is allow that representation to be set forth, which is why my family and my friends were so excited with Bridgerton. I am, as Black Girl Loves Jane, really the only Black girl in my circle of friends who like Regency period pieces, who like Jane Austen, who like Victorian pieces, who majored in it in college. And so when Bridgerton came about, it was my way of saying, this is why I like Regency so much. This is what I love about Regency. Look at this show. You will see us. You will see our representation. And then you can get into the story and not only enjoy our representation in the story, but you can enjoy the story itself. And so my friends were like, yes, finally a show where we're well-dressed and powerful and affluent and not the slave. That we got representation on the screen that shows we are multifaceted and multi-diverse, and that we fall in love, and that we have all these other issues besides just being people of color during that time frame. And then finally, I'll just leave you with this, kind of starting back at the beginning of where we started. Ken Apatow was commissioned by the Mint Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, to do a series of works celebrating the coronation of Queen Charlotte to the throne. This was around 2010, 2011. So it would have been the 250th anniversary of her coronation. It was also in line and leading up to the celebration of Charlotte, North Carolina's 250th anniversary of establishment as a city. And so he took about a year finding out about Queen Charlotte, about what people thought about Queen Charlotte. And he's the type of artist that he uses the art and the history of the art as his playground, as he says in this quote, to then create his own images. And so one of the things that he found very interesting was that every time he found or discovered from using and looking at the Sir Allan Ramsay coronation picture of Queen Charlotte, that African-American people immediately said that she was a Black girl, or that she looked like she had Blackness in her. And so out of the 6 works that he commissioned, one of them were the picture or image you see on the screen, where he basically does his own interpretation of Sir Allan's picture, portrait of her, and then says, oh yeah, she is. It was a controversial piece, but it's still hanging in Charlotte, North Carolina, along with his other works. And I found what he says very interesting and very appropriate to our discussion. He says that a painting on its own means nothing or is nothing. He said it doesn't start to have meaning until you as the audience have the ability to talk back to it. And that, for many African Americans, is what happens when they see Queen Charlotte's portrait in her coronation attire. They see themselves. And with Queen Charlotte on Bridgerton, being a person of color, seeing Simon and seeing Lady Danbury in these roles, and Marina, and all the other people of color in these roles, what it does is allow people of color to see themselves as something other than just a servant during this period, that they can see their contribution to that particular period, and that their contribution to the history of that period, as well as humanity, in some way is acknowledged. Maybe we were not dukes and duchesses of the aristocracy during the Regency period, but somewhere in the world, we were dukes and kings and queens and royalty, and that story is just as important as the stories being told during the Regency period. And so if other people get a chance to see that, and if Black people or people of color get to see themselves in something other than the servitude role, then I am all for playing to the masses. I'm all for people of color being able to talk back to the screen and see themselves and say, yep, oh yeah, that's me. I can relate. So I thank you very much for listening to my talk, and hopefully we can discuss more things together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Damie, for that talk. That was so much to think about in that. And as we start off our Q&A, I actually kind of want to start off with a comment that somebody said early on in the chat that I just thought was such a good point. I'd love to get your reaction, your thoughts on it. And that was, why is Queen Charlotte playing to the masses, but Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Eric Bana as Henry VIII aren't?
Well, in a sense, they probably are. I mean, let's just face it, Jonathan Rhys, because I'm very familiar with the Tudors. I've seen that show several times. Also, Eric Bana, I've seen that movie several times, read the book. They are playing to the masses in the sense of how they look. I mean, if we think about what we believe Henry VIII to look like, he's not Jonathan Rhys, and he's not Eric Bana. So it is playing to the masses, I believe. And I don't have particularly a problem with that either. That, because again, that is not accurate. I mean, Jonathan Rhys is not Henry VIII by any means of the stretch of the imagination. If we know what he actually looked like, we know this. Also, I mean, there's a new, I don't know if it's a movie or if it's a television series, but they're going to have Anne Boleyn played by an African, a person of color. And again, there's hullabaloo going on about the fact that they're going to use or play Anne Boleyn with a person of color. I think it's very refreshing. I've seen several movies, books I've read about Anne Boleyn. I know what Anne Boleyn looks like, or what we think Anne Boleyn looks like from her portraits. And yet at the same time, having a new spin, a refreshing idea about having this person of color and how that may contribute or not contribute to her demise, it's an interesting idea to me. Now, my question is going to be, and my question would be, how are they going to play it? So again, like some of the critics said with Queen Charlotte, if they're going to put her in this role and then ignore her race, or if it's some contribution to maybe why Henry is attracted to her or why it might cause her to get her head cut off, then that is a whole interesting dilemma that I would like to see. Will it take us out of the reality, or not the reality, of the fantasy of the film? It might be. Like some critics, Queen Charlotte mentioning King George and their daughter who passed away. I believe it's the daughter who passed away. For some critics, that took the fantasy out for them. They were like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, if we're going to do this, now we got to really talk about race. We're really going to have to talk about the fact that she's Black. We're going to have to really talk about the fact that this is 1813 and the slave trade just ended 6 years ago. We're going to have to really talk about this. So I guess it's just going to be having to see how they decide to present it, to see if it works or not. But I'm open to the idea, like I'm open to Eric Bana. So bring on Eric Bana.
Thank you for that, Davy. We have a question here, so I'll pose that question as a part of this. But something, I have read the Bridgerton series, all of the novels. There's some,
Okay, cool.
it's all of the siblings, so there are lots of them.
Okay.
And the difference between what Julia Quinn is up to, which is really historical, like her deep commitment to historical fiction, is that Shonda Rhimes is not doing that. This is speculative history. This is intentional ahistoricism. So, for folks who are getting deeply worked up, like there's not a claim that the Netflix series is making about its historical honesty. It's doing something a little creative there. And yet at the core, it is the romance. It's the same romance that we find, the same feeling that we find in the novel itself. So I'm wondering what you think about how much that shift to a speculative history about how race worked in England does or doesn't define what we take in as just what is a romance story, like what is a romance novel, a romance television series?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've never been a romance reader. So really Bridgerton was for me, and I had to do my own little investigation, of course, was because, oh my God, there's going to be Black people in the Regency period. Exciting, right? So then I had to, of course, go to her website and like, okay, these are romance novels. And I still really didn't know what romance meant in a sense. I did and I didn't. So the romance in Bridgerton, you know, for some of my friends was a little bit shocking. They were like, okay, you know. So I think when it comes to these romantic Regency adaptions of books, that I don't think race should come into it at all. I mean, there's Amber Riley, I believe she's a romance writer who is an African American. There are several others. I don't think it hurts or helps. I think race is a construct, first of all, it's a social construct that we have created to differentiate people in general. My goal and what I think Shonda Rhimes is trying to do is to say there are these different people in this world who are also valid. And they just happen to have brown skin or Black skin or Asian skin or white skin for that matter. And after you see them, get to know them and see what their cultures bring to the story, bring to the world, embrace it, incorporate it, and then move on to the story. I think part of the reason why Bridgerton, particularly for purists, is such a problem is that it was in some ways hyped up to be like this real romantic, get busy Jane Austen show, when it really doesn't have anything to do with Jane Austen. It just happens to be around the time she wrote. But it really has nothing to do with her at all. And so because some of them believe the hype, that it is Jane Austen-esque, some got offended. And I think you have to let that go and let it be what it is. And as hopefully as it goes, it's going to have to explain, I think, especially in season 2, again, more deeply about how these races came about. I have my own idea, but it might change by the time. But how did these races get the aristocracy that they have? How are you going to incorporate these South Asian people who are coming in here? Because history says they were there too, that many married into families and came across to Great Britain and changed their names and baptized their children as Christians. So they're going to have to explain it, but I don't think it has to be so bogged down where we are getting a history lesson in that sense. And that we can differentiate. I think, and I'm probably going way too long on this question, is I think part of the problem is that we are expecting entertainment to teach us. And entertainment can teach us, don't get it twisted, it can teach you, but it's also your due diligence to go out and figure out what is accurate and what is not. I mean, I've sat and looked at all of Crown several times, and I still had to do my due diligence of what is accurate and what is not, and not taking everything that they did in the show as face value, as a representation of the family. And I think that's what we have to do when it comes to Bridgerton. It's not going to solve all the questions of slavery or race or feminism. It's just not going to do that. Because at the end, at the heart of it, it is a romance genre, and that's its goal to get to the love, romance of whatever couple they're sharing or dealing with at the time.
This question coming up that one of the audience members asked is actually kind of related to what Danielle asked and what you've been saying. One of the audience members asked if purists have a problem with something like Bride and Prejudice, that of course, transforms the whole Bennett story into an Indian world. And, I was wondering myself if that might be different because it's an adaptation rather than something that is, historical in some kind of way. And then somebody in the chat mentioned Hamilton. And I thought, oh, that was a very interesting comparison. So I wonder if you have anything more to say about that.
Yeah, Pride and Prejudice I have looked at several years ago, but I have looked at it. And I think it is because it is an adaptation. There are several, especially of Pride and Prejudice. There's also one called Pride and Prejudice in Atlanta, which stars African Americans. Very contemporary. It's not a book, or it was a television movie on Lifetime here in the States. And so I think people don't have as much a problem with it if it's an adaptation and it's modernized. So they're like, oh, the same storyline and structure is happening here, but it's now, 1999 or 2000 or whatever. And so they're okay with it. I think the challenge for most peers is when you're trying to insert people of color in a time period where they're believed not to be. And I think that's the problem. So the people who are having problem with Anne Boleyn being a Black woman in this new adaptation about Henry and her and their relationship, this idea or problem with the personal narrative of David Copperfield, where they had Dev Patel being David Copperfield, and that was a color blind casting. There was no rhyme or reason to it. It was just, you're the one we want for the role, and so you're his aunt, even if you're white, or his whatever. So people had a problem with that. People had a problem with Dickens, Mrs. Cratchit being a woman of color. And that was adaptation, so it wasn't necessarily, there were adaptations, but they were adaptations of that particular period. And I think they have problems with doing that, inserting that in. When it comes to Hamilton, I love Hamilton. It's my favorite musical of the moment right now. And Hamilton kind of does a mixture of the two, I want to say. They do a lot of color casting, blind casting. So, for instance, Thomas Jefferson is played by a person of color. Hamilton is played by a person of color of Latino descent, depending on what version you've seen. His wife is of Asian descent. I'm trying to think of her name in her life. I think it's Liza or Liz, but she's of Asian descent. So they're doing a lot of color blind casting for Hamilton. The reason that Lin-Manuel Miranda says he did it was he wanted, again, people of color to see that they were a part of the American story. That this America of freedom and all rights and liberties are allowed for you, made by your creator, that's for you too. And that's why he chose to do Hamilton in that manner. As I said earlier, I think, and there were people, let me first say, there were people who were disturbed by Hamilton having this multi-ethnic, multi-diverse cast. So let's not say that no one cared. People cared. People cared about this idea that you're having Thomas Jefferson being played by a Black man, knowing the irony of the fact that Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner and had several biracial children. So people did have a problem with it. But I think the overall idea that America can be for everyone, and the music was very enticing, especially for my, 18-year-olds and 17-year-olds. It was very enticing to them and very seductive to them, that some people did overlook this color blind casting that was happening in his shows. And I believe even at one time he did get in a little trouble where he had to make it clear, if you're the best person for the role, you will get the role. But what we are trying to do here is not to ice white people out of it, but that we want to make sure that the other people were included in. And so when they did touring casts across the country, they had to make sure that that was known, that we were not discriminating against you because you're white, but we want to make sure you know that we're going to also look for people of color to star in these roles, because part of the idea, this is kind of where the color consciousness comes in. Part of the idea is to make sure that that the goal of the story is being displayed.
So we have, continuing on this kind of historical representation line, somebody has asked for clarification on this idea that history is never written by the losers, stating that victims of the Jewish Holocaust cannot be considered winners, but we do have extraordinary accounts, historical biographies, journals, etc. And I'd like to add on to that question to this idea of whether or not you think that these kinds of casting choices can be a step in the direction to reclaim or reveal voices that were traditionally erased.
Okay, so part one of the question, when I said history is written by the winners, because the losers are either dead or their voices are suppressed, it's because from my experience as a person of color, the stories of people of color in America are not told. We don't know all the things that people of color have invented, have created, have done, have contributed to the American experience. From what I've seen from my research, that's the same that has happened over in Great Britain as well, that some of the stories are being told, but not all of them. And not just people of color in the sense of Black people or whatever, but usually the people who win get to tell the tale. So if you look at any history book here, at least in America, especially in Texas right now, if you look at a history book, they don't give the same representation of what happened during the Civil War, what happened after the Civil War, what happened during the Civil Rights Movement, what happened during the immigration issues that were happening with Asian Americans in the late or mid 1800s as they were coming over, building the railroads here in the United States. A lot of those histories are not told or not explained fully to our students here in high schools here in the United States, at least. And so, though there are representations that are being told, and we are progressing all the time, so where we are now in 2021 is far different and far vastly improved than it was 10, 15 years ago. So people who are of Jewish descent, their voices are being heard more, their stories are being told more and chronicled in narrations that are being taught in school, that I've taught in my own classes, as well as other stories like with Frederick Douglass. They're still vastly misrepresented. So my example would be, I do like film. So my example is the only stories that film or Oscars seem to nominate or care about when it comes to people of color, Black people of color, is when it's a slave movie. So the Oscar winner a couple years ago was 12 Years a Slave, directed by Steve McQueen, who was a British British person of color. So great movie, love it. But if you look at the series of all the movies that's ever been written or told about the stories of Black people or people of color, I don't really think there's any. They've been nominated, a few, but most are not recognized or explored. If we look at box office, people who go see these films about Black experiences are predominantly Black people. People who are non-people of color don't go see them. Maybe it's because they're not marketed to them, which is a possibility. Maybe it's because it may not seem like that is something that they're interested in. But there are other stories about Black people besides slavery. There are other stories about Jewish people besides the Holocaust. There are other stories about Asian Americans besides the struggle of learning how to speak English in America. I mean, so there are other stories to be told. And if Hollywood doesn't want to recognize them or don't bring them out, then that means their voices are still being suppressed or not listened to or not acknowledged. And so then when people burst out and say, hey, I got an idea, I'm going to put Black people and Asian people, and we're going to drop them in 1811. And we're going to let their stories be told this way. It's a challenge because now, in a sense, as I was saying, I'm invading maybe your space. And I'm saying, hey, look at me, we were here. And that can be a problem. That can be a problem. Do I think, like I said, do I think we're better now? Oh, yeah, vastly better. Vastly better. Can we improve? Yes, we can improve. When we still have to have a discussion about whether or not Queen Charlotte can be Black as a fictionalized version of herself in a show that's really a romance novel about love and getting together and breaking up, then we still got work to do. It's okay.
This all reminds me, like I said, I read contemporary romance and historical romance. It's written in the present of Black romance author Beverly Jenkins saying that she proposed writing an interracial romance, and her publisher pushing back and saying, I don't know if readers will like that. And she said, readers like novels where people have romances with vampires and aliens. I think they can handle romance with other human beings, right? Like readers can do it.
If they can do that, they can surely do this. Like really, they can accept this.
That's right. That's brilliant. So I wonder what you have to say, Damianne. We have a couple questions about this, about the potential of there being DNA testing or some sort of effort to really pin down whether or not Queen Charlotte was in fact, does have any African heritage. Whether you know of anything like that, whether you think that's a good idea, is it important at all to be able to dispositively answer this question?
I think, well, okay, there's a couple ways to do that or to think about that question. I think that if we can test her DNA somehow or another, why not? I don't see the problem with her DNA being tested or not. So we could do it, great, wonderful. And even if it's so, then if it comes back and she's not of African descent, or okay, so be it. Because again, I don't personally care one way or the other. I'm glad she is who she is. She has brought a great line with her because now we have again Prince Harry. So if she is not a person of color, so be it. If she is, I think it's going to be more problematic for those who have been arguing that she's not than for those who are arguing that she is. It is a huge disparity of time. I mean, let's just face it. It's 500 years before we even get her. But at the same time, we're all, in a sense, if we trace ourselves far back enough, we're probably all related some way or another. And most people believe the cradle of civilization was Africa. So most of us are going to find eventually somewhere down the line, there was someone who may have been of African descent. I'm more worried about if they do test her DNA, find that she is an African descent, even though, again, it's 500 years. So the time frame of how much blood is there is going to be great. Of course, there might be other between that 500 years that makes the blood stronger as far as African descent. But my question is, how would people react? I mean, because here people are just reacting and it's a fictionalized character. Can you imagine what it would be if she is actually a person of color? What does that mean for the royal family? What does that mean for Harry? As Kate Williams said, what does that mean? What does that mean about, when I was doing this PowerPoint, the whole hullabaloo happened with Meghan Markle and Oprah. and this idea that there may be some racism in the royal family and the hullabaloo of all that. And so if that's how that maybe we were acting in the royal family, we don't know this for sure. All I can take is from what Megan says. If this is the reaction to some of the people who are in the press about the alleged racism that may be there, what does that say? How will they react? What will other people in the circles react? The other circles of the royal families. At this point, they're almost all related somehow or another. So how will they react? Will they embrace this idea that they are, you know, a person of color? Will that make them more inclusive? Will it make the country more inclusive? Will it make the people who are strict royalists or people who are strict purists, Regency purists, will that make them more open-minded, or will they make them shut down? I think I read one article. It says that the royal family in of themselves are not interested in finding out or doing whatever may take to find out. That's up for them to decide. But I would really be interested for sure to see what the reaction would be if she's not.
We're getting close to needing to wrap up, but I've got a question that will allow you to indulge your fancy.
Okay.
I loved Ken Apkar's idea of talking back. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I think that's really great. We've got a couple of questions for you, asking what you think about how they can weave more of the backstory of people of color into Bridgerton, and also what other works, specifically what other Austen's novels would you like to see populated by persons of color talking back in this way?
Okay. So I have a theory about them explaining people of color in Bridgerton, particularly Black people of color. So, but what it does do what some of the critics are afraid of. It's bringing a little reality in here. So we have to then acknowledge that there was a slave trade that ended in 1207. I mean, not 1207, in 1807. That there was a slave trade that ended, and that those who were still living in England because of the Somerset case of 1772. And for those of you who don't know what it is basically just says, if you were a slave and you were brought to England, they can't bring you back. They can't take you back to your, if you're here, you're free. And so these are the people that created this world that we call Bridgerton, the people of color. That's my theory. They are free people here that were successful people in their own right, in their own little worlds. And that eventually over time, as eventually George III, is deemed not fit to rule, Prince Regent comes in along with Queen Charlotte, that's when the separation of the races are occurring. Or the separation of the races is a race. That's when people of color are now intermixing. And I think it also then would explain why the Duke of Hastings, the first Duke of Hastings, Simon's dad, it was so adamant to make sure that he had an heir, because he needed that heir to continue on what he had been, in a sense, given by Queen Charlotte, by the royalty, that here's a title for people of color. You can't mess this up, Simon. Get yourself together. So that is my theory of how they explain it in more detail, because I do think it's going to need more detail to some degree. Again, I'm not looking for a history lesson, but I do think you have to say more than love brought us together. Second part, I'm interested in, the one thing I haven't seen is an adaptation of any Jane Austen novel in its original form with a multi-ethnic cast. I have not seen that. And if there is one, I would like to see it. I did see a play called Miss Bennet, Christmas at Pemberley. but it wasn't like a national thing that was done. It was just locally here in the city that I live in that they cast an African-American Mary Bennett. And I was like, oh, great, Mary Bennett is a Black girl. And then 5 minutes later, I forgot that Mary Bennett was a Black girl. And then she was just Mary Bennett. Awkward and piano playing and into herself as always. So I think I would like to see, because I'm not as strong a favor of Pride and Prejudice, though I love it. I love Pride and Prejudice. But my favorite is Persuasion. I think Persuasion is very adaptable. My future book, hopefully one day, will be on Persuasion and more modernized. But I would like to see an adaptation of Persuasion. That's what I would like to see.
Damie, thank you so much. And
You're
thank you
welcome.
to everyone in our audience. Please stick around as we tell you about our exciting new creative writing workshops and how to get involved with this year's JASP. This is just me telling you, if you haven't watched Bridgerton, go watch Bridgerton. You have an excuse now, a scholarly excuse to go watch it. We would also like to take this moment to thank our sponsors for this program, including the Orange County Arts Commission and North Carolina Cares, Chapel Hill Public Library, and the Humanities for the Public Good Initiative at UNC Chapel Hill, who provided us with a critical issues grant to partially support this season's series. A word from our partners, the Chapel Hill Public Library.
Hi there, I'm Maya James, staff member here at Chapel Hill Public Library, where I'm joining you tonight. On behalf of the town of Chapel Hill and the library, thank you so much, Damie, for your wonderful presentation. And we're really pleased to be teaming up with Jane Austen and Co. on the Race in the Regency series. And we're especially excited to host a special contest, like Danielle mentioned, happening this spring as part of the series. The contest is titled A Truth Universally Re-Acknowledged, a Pride and Prejudice Writing Contest. The challenge is to imagine Jane Austen's beloved story in a new context, real or imagined, and submit your 500 to 1,000 word adaptation of the first scene or chapter of Pride and Prejudice for a chance to win admission to the Jane Austen Summer Program, which you'll hear more about in just a moment. Submissions are due May 10th. Our judges are Martha Waters, author of To Have and to Hoax, Susan Brown, director of Chapel Hill Public Library, and Sonia Kamal, author of Unmarriageable. We're also hosting a couple of workshops to help you get started on your entry for the contest, although you do not have to attend a workshop to enter. The second and final workshop is full, but if you'd like to be added to the wait list, just send me an email at mjames@townofchapelhill.org. Submission for the contest is now open, and the web address to do that is chapelhillpubliclibrary.org/writing contest. You can see that there in the red bar at the bottom of the slide there. And if you have, and the contest is open to anyone of any age. If you have any questions, you can call the library or send me an email at mjames@townofchapelhill.org. And again, that email is also on the writing contest webpage, linked there at the bottom of your slide.
And before you leave, we would like to announce our next two programs for the Race in the Regency series. So Damie actually showed the book by Gretchen Berzina. Well, good news, we're going to be talking to her next. On April 27th, she'll be talking to us about the Black woman in 19th century studies, looking at both the representation of Black women in art in that period, but also the realities of their life. And then on May 4th, Juliet Wells will be doing a special session on teaching Jane Austen and diversity, part of our JASP's special mission to train teachers and involve them in the process about really talking about Jane Austen in the classroom. These programs are free and will take place over Zoom. Full details and registration can be found on our website, janeaustenandco.org.
And thanks to all of you who have registered for JASP this June. We are sold out and we are thrilled about it. But if you have registered, please remember that you can still purchase a deluxe Regency parcel to supplement your experience at home, or sign up for our special workshops for teachers entitled JASP Plus. And this is especially for middle and high school educators. Be on the lookout for Jane Austen and Shakespeare in 2022.
If you enjoyed tonight's talk and discussion, please consider making a donation to the Jane Austen Summer Program, our parent organization. JASP is a registered nonprofit, so your donations are tax deductible in the United States. And since April 15th is this week, many of us are already thinking ahead to next year. Donations help keep Jane Austen and Company events free and open to the public. They allow us to bring in the wonderful speakers we've heard from this year, like Damianne Scott, E.B. Zaboy, Patricia Matthew, Robert Morrison, and others. And the money you contribute also enables us to provide scholarships to middle school and high school teachers to attend our program and to learn how to incorporate Jane Austen and other authors into their classrooms. I can testify that there's nothing more invigorating than the kind of immersion that the Jane Austen Summer Program offers, and that kind of invigoration can be especially necessary for teachers getting ready to return to the classroom. In fact, JASP has a new program, JASP Plus, that will offer scholarships for teachers to spend 2 to 4 days after the summer symposium collaborating on a digital publishable project that synthesizes ideas taken from JASP lectures and discussions. Contributions to JASP are very easy to make on the website. Please help us work toward greater historical literacy and another generation of readers of Jane Austen like Damie.
Thank you again, Damie, for joining us tonight. It was a wonderful presentation, and thank you all for coming. We hope you guys stay healthy and safe and have a great evening. Take care.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.